Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. The term intifada means shaking. And under Yasser Arafat, there was a shaking when the Palestinians rose up to protest what really would have been a very favorable treaty. And now the elements of Hamas and some of the other radical Arab groups are saying because of President Trump's very bold decision, they're going to start a second intifada. Now, is it going to be successful? Will there be riots? Will there be some trouble? Well, there probably will be. But the truth is, we've been playing around with that situation in Jerusalem for decades. And President Trump did what was the obvious decision to be made. Congress had said, let's move the embassy to Jerusalem. And every year the president had to issue a waiver because why they weren't going to do it. But now the president has said, we're going to recognize Jerusalem as what it is. It's the capital of Israel. And we're going to put our embassy there because we should. And if the Arab states don't like it, that's tough luck. But the truth is they should like it. Why not? And there's nothing in there that prohibits a two-state solution, prohibits having a part of Jerusalem that's used for the Arabs. There's nothing in his statement that does that. All it does is say Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel, and we're going to have an embassy there. That's it. We have a perfect right to do it. The Israelis have a perfect right to designate their capital, and that's what we're doing. We're acknowledging a fact. Terry.
Despite that perfect right, the president's action has been severely criticized by other world leaders because they say it will hurt the peace process. But it's a move millions of Americans and Jews have been looking forward to for decades. CBN's Jennifer Wishon has the story from the White House.
By recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy there, President Donald Trump has secured his place in history and demonstrated another reason why Americans elected an outsider not beholden to tradition.
We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past.
After decades of failed peace negotiations and a continuation of violence, President Trump says it's time to do something different.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
For decades, Democrats and Republicans running for president dangled the promise of recognizing Jerusalem, only to fail to follow through once in office. President Trump delivered. He says he's just acknowledging reality, that Jerusalem has been Israel's capital for decades, and kicking off a new strategy for peace while reaffirming that the U.S. would support a two-state solution if that's what both sides agreed to.
Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul.
Immediately, enthusiastic praise poured in from a diverse group of evangelical leaders. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee says President Donald Trump did what his predecessors didn't have the courage to do. In doing so, he set two great examples: how to make good on promises and how to treat your friends. Reverend Samuel Rodriguez says the historical record, empirical fact, and our faith all confirm that Jerusalem is in fact the capital of the Jewish people. I therefore enthusiastically applaud President Trump's decision. And Bishop Harry Jackson says it marks the beginning of a new season in U.S. Middle East policy. The previous administration allowed persecution, terrorism, and stereotyping of the Israeli people. President Trump called for a continuation of the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites.
Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque.
With the president's announcement, now architects, engineers, and planners will begin building America's new embassy in Jerusalem. It will take some time to complete, but the president says he's building a magnificent tribute to peace. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Well, it'll remain to be seen whether this will be a monument to peace or not, but the Palestinians will not like it, but the Arab nations will recognize it really is a minor bump along the road. And as far as the Saudis are concerned, the Iranians are their enemy, and the Palestinians are kind of a sideshow. So we'll see what happens. But I think the president did a very courageous thing. And let's face it, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel ever since the days of King David. King David conquered the city, took the place that was called Mount Zion, and it's been the capital of Israel ever since. But according to the Bible, mark it down, the great fight is not Megiddo. Armageddon is Mount of Megiddo. The Battle of Armageddon is not going to be fought at Megiddo. It's going to be fought in Jerusalem. They gather at Megiddo, but they march on Jerusalem. And that will be the contentious point of the nations of the world. They will come against Israel on account of Jerusalem. Mark it down. It's what the Bible says. But right now, the president is on the side of the angels, and he's done a very bold thing that's going to redound well to the success of the United States of America. Well, despite support here in the United States, some protests have already broken out in the Middle East against the president's move. Wendy Griffith has that.
That's right, Pat. The clashes broke out across the West Bank today. Hundreds of Palestinians and Israeli troops faced off, and demonstrators in Gaza burned Israeli and U.S. flags. The protesters also set tires on fire and threw stones at anti-riot troops. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led a chorus of Israeli officials praising and thanking President Trump. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led a chorus of Israeli officials praising and thanking President Trump.
This is a historic day. Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. It's been the capital of Israel for nearly 70 years. President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Just minutes after President Trump's decision, which was 8 p.m. Israel time, the city of Jerusalem adorned the walls of the old city behind me with a projected image that said, December 6th, Jerusalem applauds President Trump.
I think, if anything, this move will further and bring peace forward, since our neighbors have to realize that in any scenario, Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people.
But Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas condemned Trump's decision.
Trump's decision tonight will not change the status of Jerusalem and will not give any legitimacy to Israel in this issue, because Jerusalem is a Palestinian, an Arab Islamic Christian city, and the eternal capital of Palestine.
The PA called for 3 days of rage, while a chorus of voices in the region echoed the Palestinian Authority president. The IDF reported rioting by Hamas, and Hamas also organized this march of anger. Turkey's President Erdogan said Trump crossed a red line and called for an Islamic summit next week to discuss the decision. Turkey's foreign minister warned it threatened the region.
This is an extremely irresponsible and wrong statement. Not only do we not accept this statement, we strongly condemn it because this kind of statement endangers the region's stability and security.
Yet many evangelicals applauded the decision. Mike Evans of the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem unfurled a banner that says, God bless Trump from Jerusalem, D.C., David's capital, to Washington, D.C.
We believe what he did is going to bring the blessing of God on our own country, America.
Evans compared President Trump to another U.S. President, Harry Truman, who 70 years ago, against the advice of his own State Department and many advisors, recognized the newly declared State of Israel. Evans believes we're seeing prophecy come to pass.
And as somebody that's wanted and prayed and hoped for this for more than 40 years, I see us in the middle of prophecy right now.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Such an historic day, Pat.
Well, it is historic, but you know, all those previous presidents have all promised that. They have campaigned on the strength. We're going to put our embassy in Jerusalem. We will recognize Jerusalem, and then came to the time and they backed down and they got cold feet. And primarily it was the State Department that was leading the charge. Well, the Arabs won't like it. Well, look, what are they going to do about it? And are they going to sever relations with America? And the United Nations Security Council is meeting. Well, we have a veto in the Security Council. But even if we didn't, we give them all this money. So the truth is, if they keep making dumb moves, we can always say, fellas, we're not going to pay for your folly anymore. We're not going to pick up the tab. And I think that's going to send more of a message than anything else. Well, I've seen pictures, and perhaps you have too, of these unbelievable firestorms. The Santa Ana winds are blowing 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. The fires are out of control because of these winds. And Wendy, they say they've never been this bad. What do you think?
That's exactly right. They have never seen it this bad before in California. Extremely high winds are driving the state's powerful wildfires. The state's warning system has reached an unprecedented level. The state's fire director says winds could reach hurricane strength at 80 miles per hour. 90,000 acres have burned in Ventura already. People returned to their neighborhoods to discover their homes nothing but rubble.
I'm grateful we have our home, but I'm very sad for my neighbors and the way my neighbors look, and it's just horrible.
Authorities ordered tens of thousands of people to evacuate because of the 3 major wildfires burning in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Nearly 200 homes and buildings have been destroyed. We need to definitely pray for them. Well, Minnesota Senator Al Franken is expected to resign from Congress today. At least 7 more women have now come forward accusing the Minnesota senator of sexual misconduct. A majority of his fellow Democrats in the Senate have called for him to step aside.
We need to draw a line in the sand and say none of it is okay.
I think today's revelations just further add to a fact pattern here that's just unacceptable.
Franken's move comes just 2 days after Michigan Democratic Congressman John Conyers resigned following similar allegations. But Alabama Republican Roy Moore won't drop out of his Senate race. He's also been accused of sexual misconduct. Pat, do you think Moore's right to do this?
Well, this is a ploy by the Democrats to say we're going to put Trump in a box. He has supported Roy Moore, who's been accused of violating teenagers and dating teenagers when he was in his 30s. He's denied all of it. Franken admitted to his stuff, and we have pictures about Franken. We don't have any pictures of Roy Moore doing anything. So we'll see. But the president has said, I want a Republican in there, and that's the way it's going to be. But once he is confirmed, the Senate might well be moving to, deny him a seat. We'll see what happens. But they should allow the voters of Alabama to decide who they want to represent them. But many, many Democrats have called on Franken to resign, and he says he's going to do it. And Conyers has come out and resigned because of the problems that it was clearly what he'd done. But in terms of Trump, they're trying to put him in a box and say, you see, he's two-faced, he's supporting Roy Moore, but we're clean, and we've gotten rid of Franken and the Congressman Conyers. So we'll see how it plays out. But it's a political game that they're playing, and so you got to recognize what's going on and see how it plays. Well, here's Wendy again.
Pat, despite all the scandals swirling in Washington, it is the holiday season, a time for many of us to be thankful. And as Pat reminds us, thankfulness is something we should practice all year round.
How important is Thanksgiving?
Listen, I think, praise for God for who he is and thanksgiving for what he's done. I remember some years ago, my wife and I didn't have much money, and we were living in a house that was provided to us by a philanthropist. And this was kind of a wretched house. It had no central heat. And so in order to get warm in a cold winter, we had to go into the kitchen and turn the stove on and sit around to get warm because there was no heat in the building. it was in an area where there was some really bad neighbors. It was a miserable place to have my wife and children. And so I told my wife, I said, now listen, dear, I know this isn't nice, but don't you ever complain. Don't you ever complain. Don't you ever complain. And we will praise God for what we've got. And when the time comes, he'll get us out of here. And so that was our attitude, and there was no complaining. And before long, I went to my philanthropist friend. I said, what do you think about my building a house? He said, I think it's a terrible idea. He said, why should you build a house when I've got that beautiful place out in the country with nobody in it? And you can have it if you want it.
Wow.
So I moved from this wretched place in a slum out to a beautiful colonial with columns, oak trees, 1,000 acres of land around it, magnificent, beautiful. And that's what the Lord had for us. But he said, don't complain. And when I didn't complain, and this man said, I don't know of any preacher that will accept what you've accepted and where you live, where you've lived. And basically, he recognized I hadn't complained.
Answered Prayer, available January 15th.
Great lesson there, Pat. No complaining.
Well, I hope this DVD is a blessing to people. It's going to be available January. We want to tell you, we've got some teaching in there that I think is very important. How to have your prayers answered, some examples of answered prayer, some wonderful experiences from my own personal life. And Scott and I had a great time together, and we want to share it with you. Coming January the 1st, answered prayer.
That's very exciting. I mean, I think people love hearing how God has moved in your life based on things he's asked you to do or not do.
Well, I've got plenty of stories. They're in that DVD with Scott and I. Scott and I have a lot of fun together, and he rides motorcycles and I ride horses, and we're both crazy doing that.
I'm going to agree with that. Just saying.
Okay, well, that's coming. Watch January the 1st. For that, we'll tell you how to get it, how it'll become available to you in the first of the year. But I just wanted to give you a little flavor of what's there, because the crew really liked it, and I hope it's going to be.
Well, it's a good word. Everybody wants to know how to have your prayers answered.
Absolutely.
We get a lot of those questions in our email.
All right.